Brilliant. So thank you so much for joining me today. If you wouldn't mind just giving me a quick introduction as to who you are and what you do, please.
Sure. Hello. It's lovely to meet you. Yeah, my name's William Ward. I'm client engagement for Green Eco Technologies, and we have designed and built a solution called WasteMaster. And WasteMaster is a solution for repurposing food and organic waste on site, typically for hotels, hospitals, anyone creating a large amount of food and organic waste to avoid going to landfill. And we repurpose and we end up with what we call a residue, which has a very high calorific value and typically is used for creating green energy. But there are many other purposes which a number of people are looking into various testing. But I thought I'd share with you as well, if you don't already know, today is Stop Food Waste Day.
Oh, brilliant.
So when it came up as the invite on the calendar, I thought, oh, how ideal is that to talk about trying to stop food waste on Stop Food Waste Day. So
there we are. Perfectly designed.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
What is it that got you into this industry in terms of, sustainability being very sort of front of mind at the moment and has been, a priority for a lot of businesses? What was it that was a driving force for you to make sure that sustainability was front and centre to what you're offering at Green Eco Tech?
Oh, I guess it started 10 or 11 years ago, coming from an IT background. And using technology to help clients drive down, at the time, the big focus was driving down carbon. And our government had this big push on the carbon reduction commitment and league tables as to who was doing well. And we was helping investment banks and things of that in implementing technology so they could have real-time information on where all their energy was going, and then they could pinpoint and focus on what they could do better. And as that evolved into being more doing what we call smart metering and monitoring, and it's the old adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And so we deliver solutions that allow people to see where their gas, their water, electricity, when it comes into the building, where does it actually go, and who's leaving the lights on, or who's leaving equipment running when maybe the office is closed. And then through relationships, about 18 months ago, I had calls to meet with the owner of Green Eco Technologies, and I always look at this type of technology, if you want, a little bit. Will it really work? Does it say what it says do what it says on the tin? And I have to say, I was very impressed. I took a closer look, and I thought, yes, this could make a difference. It wasn't until I got more intimately involved that I started to realise how much food and organic waste is being created. And I suppose that's what then kept me focused. To spend a lot of time now on meeting people, talking to people on how, yes, there's ways and means to help them try to reduce their waste, but ultimately, when they do have waste, how we can better repurpose that, reuse it, creating whether it's green energy or nutrients, and just make full use of that waste rather than it going to landfill.
And are people surprised, when you're giving them I don't know if you've got any sort of facts around the volumes of waste that are, I know the event industry, for example, is highly wasteful when it comes to food waste. And, in particular in the event industry, about 20% of food is wasted, of which 75% of that is consumable and it just gets thrown away. So are people surprised? I guess education is a big part of what you're trying to do to get people on board with how big a problem it is before you can then sell in a solution.
Well, there's different levels, because we predominantly were going to be focusing our efforts on hospitals and hotels. Mm-hmm. Now, forget the current environment with COVID-19, but in essence, a hospital is a hotel for sick people, and they're serving 3 meals a day. And if it's a 500-bed hospital, that's a lot of meals, and they always have to overcompensate because they never know what people's tastes are like. So there's a considerable amount of waste. And unfortunately, if you're not feeling well, you're in hospital, and if you're not feeling well, you don't usually eat so much. But they still have to provide 3-4 meals a day. So there's a considerable amount of waste. And likewise in the hotel sector. But what we've learned over the last 12 to 18 months in talking to food production companies, growers, greenhouse companies, packers, the amount of food waste that's destroyed, or sorry, it's not even at that point, it's not even waste. The amount of waste food that gets destroyed is just unbelievable. And, we're talking tons and tons per day, not insignificant amounts. They are significant. Just if you looked at it and saw it, you'd think to yourself, why? And there's legislation, or sometimes supermarkets want cucumbers or tomatoes to be a certain shape, a certain size, and it just makes me wonder. And I look at it and I think, how can they destroy this much food waste? And especially if that then starts going again to landfill and the problems that causes. So
I guess some supermarkets are starting, you see more and more selling, the wonky veg and the food that isn't quite perfect at a cheaper price, just so that, again, there technically isn't anything wrong with it, but it just doesn't look the same, or it isn't as straight as, an average cucumber, or the right shade of red for a tomato. So I think people are coming around to it, but maybe not as quickly as they should be. So in just one word, how would you define sustainability? I know it's the sort of impossible task to, take something such a complex subject and sort of bring it into one word. But what do you think when people talk about sustainability? What springs to mind?
I guess if you would allow it to be one word, long life. Even whether it's got a hyphen in between or not. Words, but
we'll let you have that one.
So long life, how do you get the most out of what you've got? How can you reuse? You hear so many people now about repurposing plastic, repurposing wood. We even have a potential client that is taking orange peel or orange skin after it's going through the juicer and running it through our system and repurposing it and making tabletops, making
fantastic.
And it becomes insulated. So there's so many great ideas going on out there. But yeah, so a long way around saying long life. How do you get long life out of your product?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like you were saying, taking a waste product and turning it back into something of use rather than just disregarding it and putting it into landfill. So definitely.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, so besides obviously the current pandemic that we're going through, and there's a lot of challenges to life at the moment. Before all of this happened, what sort of challenges were you finding when you were discussing whether it was food waste and your solution for that, or just generally sustainability and being more efficient with energy? What are sort of the biggest challenges that you're finding when you're talking about this topic?
Now that I probably can put into one word. It's called change.
Yeah.
And to expand on that, nobody likes change. It's a human trait, I guess, that to accept change is tough. But people have done things the same way for so long. Why do we want to change the way we do it? So we create all this waste, and the guy comes with his truck, and we just throw it in his bin, and he takes it away, and we dig a big hole in the desert or in the land somewhere, and we just fill up this hole. It doesn't have to be like that. So there is an education, showing people how things can be done different, how they can be done better. And I guess people's initial reaction is, so that's going to cost me a lot more money, what the impact is going to be. But most of it is down to behavioural change. And if you've ever seen or heard the story about, you're probably too young, but there used to be a marathon bar which has now become Snickers.
Yeah.
And that changed its name in 1990, 30 years ago. Somebody recently, back end of last year, digging up the ground in their garden, found a marathon wrapper.
Wow, it's still around after
Shows you
time.
how long it takes for plastic to disappear, whereas some of these biodegradable products now, we're actually seeing them disappear in our process. And ours is a continual 24-hour process. So, from going in, and the other thing I should add, what we're doing, we're reducing the volume by 70 to 80%. So not only are we reducing the volume, we're changing the whole complexity of it. And if it's got biodegradable in it, we seem to be losing that as well. So that's in actual fact, 40% of food waste, ends up in landfill.
Really? And I think I read somewhere actually that, if food waste was a country, it would be the third largest sort of emitter of greenhouse gases behind the US and behind China. So in terms of a component of what's actually contributing to the issue that we're in at the moment, it would be the third biggest contributor.
No, very much so. There's so much data about the negative effects food waste can have. We can't do without it in terms of the food, but the negative effect of the waste, that if it's repurposed and it's used properly, then we can close the loop and make much better use of it.
Yeah, totally. Excellent. Okay. So can you recommend, I'm sure in the industry there's lots of partners or other businesses that you're working with, but anyone that you've seen that has particularly impressed you or inspired you in the sustainability space? Anyone you'd recommend?
But I suppose one of the big ones is there's an entity called Olio, where they're taking more the not end of life food waste, but it still has lifetime left in it as far as it's sell by date. It's still edible, and they're taking that and they're using, I suppose you would call it, almost like distribution centres. And they're taking from supermarkets, from producers, food that can't be sold or whatever, and rather than that going to waste, they're able to redistribute it.
Brilliant. Yes. And I think, and they're perfect as a perfect partner, I think, in the event industry as well, in terms of, often you're over catering probably by 10% because you're thinking, that fear of running out of food, and everyone will remember that event. So, you want to have that sort of backup store. So you tend to over cater by 10% because you don't know how many people are going to come. And then you've got all of the different sort of catering requirements in terms of gluten-free or vegetarian, vegan. Yeah. And again, there's no guarantee that those people are going to turn up. So you do tend to have a hell of a lot of food waste left over after an event. Yes. And working with something like Olio would be a great example where that food, there's nothing wrong with it, can be redistributed to charities, shelters, like you say. So cool. Okay, thank you. So if you could give one piece of advice to someone that was just starting out in sustainability world, whether that's in in food waste, running a sustainable event, looking at energy efficiency, whatever it may be, something sustainable, what piece of advice would you give them to sort of help them get started?
I think if it's an organization that want to become more sustainable, I'm guessing they probably have to first of all identify a champion. And somebody that's not just taken the title because they was out of the room when the decision was made and, okay, you'll be our champion. It's got to be someone that's also passionate, that's realistic, that will seek advice. And I suppose ultimately to try and take baby steps to become sustainable, or looking at the ways and means that things are done, because people now want to only deal with people that are looking at renewables, they're looking at sustainability. And larger organisations, the big organisations that are also looking for investment, most investors now will only look at investing into companies that are taking sustainability seriously.
Yeah.
So if they're just treating it, as a
Not greenwashing, not sort of
yeah,
saying
exactly.
we're going to do X, but actually not deliver on any of those things, but really deliver it
Exactly.
seriously. Yeah, okay, that's a great one. Okay, so at the moment, I mean, obviously everything is sort of on slow-mo at the moment, whilst during the pandemic. Are you currently working at the moment? Have you got projects that are live? Have you switched to sort of communicating virtually? How are you operating at the moment?
Yeah, I think everybody's in the same boat. So I got back from travels about 2 days before we saw the lockdown here.
Wow, that was lucky.
I was actually in the Middle East as they started to, some of the meetings that I had lined up turned into conference calls. It's allowed time to reach out to people that you maybe haven't had a chance to get in touch with because of various things. So the machines that are live, and we have a couple of machines what we call on trial. So we have remote access globally to all of those. As far afield as Chile, the
Wow.
US, Australia, Spain, Middle East. So we have remote access to all those, and we
So
can
that
see
operation can continue as normal. Yeah.
that carries on, and everything's fine and dandy. It's just, I suppose, more the ones that we're just about to want to engage that when we talk to them, especially some of the hospitals, is that they've got other things on their mind at the moment, and keeping things moving rather than looking at changing the waste structure.
Yeah. So that's really interesting, actually, and it sort of brings me on to my next question in terms of, when we come out of this pandemic and whatever normal is going to look like on the other side of this. Do you think that focus on sustainability, the budget that maybe was allocated towards sustainable solutions, do you think that's still going to be there? Do you think it's going to be sidelined whilst people are focusing on, well, actually, we'll come back to that, we need to focus on getting the economy going again? How do you think people will view sustainability, and how much of a priority will it be on the other side of this?
I suppose if being selfish and just looking at our own business stream and food and organic waste side of life, the people we're talking to, when we come through and get out the other side, they will still be creating waste.
Yeah, it's not going anywhere.
We have to keep on eating, so that will not stop. Hospitals will not stop. So food producers. So after this, nothing will change.
Yeah.
We've already said, we do have a problem. We have got an issue with waste, and we want to do something about it. And excuse the pun, they want to clean up their act.
Yeah.
So,
But I guess this whole period, I think, has really taught people, and I'm not thinking so much industrially, but more on an individual level. You think about the waste in your food waste in your homes, how more efficient people are being, mindful of the food that they're using, and not something might be on the turn, previously you may have thrown that away, but you don't necessarily know when you're going to get back out to the shop, so maybe you are going to eat that and cook that. So I do think individual families have done their bit to reduce their own personal food waste. I think it's just quite interesting, that sort of mindset, whether that will continue or whether people will quickly forget how this period has been.
Well, I don't think we've ever experienced anything. Well, no, we haven't experienced anything like this. So hopefully the message has got across, and we will be more mindful of what we do. I think at the early days when this pandemic hit, people were going out mass buying, and there was probably more food waste then because they were just mass buying, and it was actually going off because they had so much they couldn't use it. That's if you want a residential or domestic level, but hopefully that transfers across. But I do think that people will be a bit more mindful of how we go about things. But I'm afraid it's going to be a long time before there's a reduction in waste. The message we're trying to put across is, what waste you do have, don't waste your waste.
Perfect. Brilliant. Okay. So last question then, and I guess most important of all, whenever we do come out of lockdown, whether that's next week, whether it's going to get postponed again, we're not quite sure. But when that finally does happen, what's the first thing on your list of things to do when lockdown is lifted?
Um, I suppose the immediate thing is family and friends that, they've been, dare I say, at arm's reach, and that arm's reach has been a video call. So I suppose that's the first. And then I guess it's back into, dare I say, business as usual, and getting back to seeing people and getting back
Yeah,
to some sort of normality.
absolutely. Super. Well, thank you ever so much. Thank you for your time. I mean, I think it's fascinating, and I think there's so many parallels into the event industry where I'm based, and lots of different things that we can do in the event industry to sort of help reduce that food waste that's happening. I mean, one thing for sure, as I was saying, we tend to over cater in the event industry, and even something as simple as bringing the chefs out into the event and cooking to order rather than sort of laying on these lavish buffets, most of which is going to end up in the bin. So actually there's a few things that you can be more mindful about in terms of how you're catering for your event, and even down to what you're sourcing, what you're serving, and there's lots of different things that you can think about. So it's fascinating, and as you say, such a massive issue, and that people just need to be more aware of the impact that it's having.
There's a lot of statistics out there, but I'll give you one statistic for one country. They have something like, in food waste, £3 billion per year just in food waste. Okay?
Wow.
I won't share which country it is, but it's a considerable amount of money. Now, until there's something implemented that's going to have a financial impact on the entity that's creating that waste. Now, whether that's a taxation for food waste going to the landfill,
Yep.
Whether it's how they police it is going to be challenging, but until there's a financial impact, when it has an effect on the pocket, people tend to do something about it.
Yeah.
So taxation or something of that nature.
Well, thank you ever so much. That's really interesting, and I think there's lots of learnings, and we'll be sharing this video, so hopefully everybody can take a look and get on board.
Thank you, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you ever so much.
Okay.
Thank you.